It was strange that the Romanised Britons couldn't pull themselves together under one banner. Not that long before, they'd all been ruled under the single banner of Rome. But instead, local leaders and maybe some of the villa nobles went off and did their own thing. That might show they never truly saw themselves as one people, even after near on 370 years of Roman rule. This total failure to come together and work as one would be what led to their downfall. Gildas wrote, "It was always true of this people, as it is now, that it was weak in beating off the weapons of the enemy, but strong in putting up with civil war and the burden of sin." The Britons were mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon writings, but it were rare and scattered. When they were, it were only as raiders or folk on the edge of the kingdoms. They weren't talked about much inside the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, which suggests folk didn't really see them as Britons anymore. When the Britons living in an Anglo-Saxon kingdom hadn't fully fitted in, and folks did mention them, they were called devils. Like in the life of Saint Guflac, where a mob of them went after Guflac. There were stories of Brythonic kings knocking about in and around Northumbria, but those tales are even less trustworthy than what we've got on the Anglo-Saxons. This could suggest that some of the native Britons managed to rise up in the Anglo-Saxon world, maybe even to the point of becoming kings. There were also accounts of some Christian Britons still living in Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, worshipping Christ in secret up in Northumbria, before the Anglo-Saxons themselves converted. The best bit of evidence we've got comes from two law codes, one from 602 and another from 619, out of Wessex and Kent. That's where the tax payments of the foreigners were laid out. Please note that I'm unsure how to pronounce most of the following, but I'm trying my best. After the Anglo-Saxon invasion, many Celtic Briton tribes still held on. Hen Ogledd, or the Old North, meant parts of northern England and southern Scotland, where Brittonic peoples kept their roots, even as Anglo-Saxon power spread. Regd sat around what's now Cumbria, where folk spoke a Cumbric dialect, close to Old Welsh. It was later taken by Northumbria. Strathclyde, once known as Alt Clud, was founded by the Dumnonia during Roman times. After raids from the Vikings, Scotti and Picts, folk moved south into the old lands of Reged. That new patch came to be known as Cumbraland. Gododin was around where Edinburgh sits now. They might have been moved there by the Romans, who often brought friendly tribes closer to the border. They were descended from the Vutadini and stood as Roman allies for a time. Like the others, they faced heavy raids from the Picts and Scotti, and were later taken by Northumbria. Elmet was around what's now Yorkshire. It didn't last long and was taken over by Dara. The Picts were a mix of tribal folk living north of the Hen Ogledd. They weren't Romanised and mostly stayed in the Highlands, in what we now call Scotland. The Scotti came over from Ulster in Ireland and settled in the kingdom of Dalriada. They spoke a Cew Celtic language, different from the Brittonic tongues spoken across mainland Albion. Further south, the land was known as Cymru, meaning kinsman. They saw themselves as descendants of the Hen Ogledd. Their forefather was Cunedda, who settled in the north of Cymru, though they didn't worship him like the Anglo-Saxons did their ancestors. Cymru and the Hen Ogledd would have seen each other as kin. Gwynedd sat in North Wales, and still stands today as a county. Gwynedd was a Roman successor state that came up in the 5th century in northwest Wales, right as the Anglo-Saxons started settling Britain. Its rulers often stood out as King of the Britons, but they often lost grip through civil wars or invasions. Pengwern, a petty kingdom near the Welsh border in what's now Shropshire, was likely the early seat of Powys kings before they shifted to Mathraval. Not much is known about its beginnings or exact spot. In the 7th century, the Powys prince, Cynflan ap Cynthroin, ruled Pengwern and joined forces with the Mercian king Penda against Northumbria. They faced off against Northumbrian king Oswald at the Battle of Maescogwi, Oswestry, in 642, where Oswald was killed. Dyfed, once known as Demte, had Irish roots and covered Pembrokeshire and parts of Carmarthenshire. It faced Irish raids in the 4th century, and forts went up along the River Taff for defence. In the 7th century, Dyfed lost Ystrad Tiwi to Ceredigion. The old Irish tale, The Expulsion of the Daci, tells of Eochaid, who fled across the Irish Sea. His kin went on to rule Dyfed. Gwent rose out of old Roman settlements and ancient tribes like the Silures. It was the most Romanised bit, sitting between the rivers Wye and Usk from the 5th century on. Brycheiniog was an independent kingdom in South Wales during the Anglo-Saxon period. It teamed up with Mercia to hold a central patch that was key for control over the region. Ergin covered western Herefordshire and parts of Monmouthshire. The English later called it Archenfield. Glywysing covered the Vale of Glamorgan, Bridgend, Cardiff and parts of the valleys. Powys stretched over most of what's now modern Powys and parts of the West Midlands. It was ruled by a dynasty that claimed descent from both the warlord Gorfern and the Roman Emperor Magnus Maximus. and many more besides. But as you can see, these folk were still very tribal and spread out, with no strong central rule. Dumnonia was the kingdom in what's now Cornwall. The turning point for them came at the Battle of Durham. 3 Briton kings died that day, and with them went 3 key Briton towns: Bath, Gloucester and Cirencester. The loss of those 3 Roman towns cut Dumnonia off from the rest of the Briton tribes. From there, their culture began to shift and grow more separate, more their own. Dumnonia had many scraps and battles with the Angles in what's now called Devon. Dumnonia fell at some point, and by the 9th century, Cornwall had taken its place, likely due to the strong campaigns of Ecgbert of Wessex. In 825, at the Battle of Gyfulford, Ecgbert brought Cornwall fully under Wessex rule. The Cymry tried to take back the Hen Ogledd from the Anglo-Saxons, but they couldn't manage it. For a powerful account of one of their efforts, please read the poem Awi Gododin. There were other smaller Brythonic and Welsh lands too. Some folk fled Britain altogether, heading to what's now France. There they formed Brittany. Others made it as far as the Iberian Peninsula, though those were fully absorbed in time. But Brittany held on to its Celtic Briton roots for centuries. Be sure to check out my other channel, History Sticks, for the complete, longer and comprehensive video.